viewers, and welcome to the Artlit review. Today we are going to discuss science fiction, and to discuss science fiction we have Adnan REHMAT with us. Adnan REHMAT has a background in media development and journalism. He writes on arts, science, development and other public interest issues. He has interest in science, arts and astronomy, and of course he is an avid reader of science fiction. But before we talk to him, we have prepared a report for you on science fiction. Please watch it.
Science fiction is a genre of literature that deals with the impact of actual or imagined science upon society or individuals. It is characterized by its futuristic and imaginative nature, often exploring the potential consequences of scientific, social, and technological innovations. Science fiction differs from other forms of literature in that it is not bound by the constraints of reality, allowing for the creation of entirely new worlds and possibilities. The genre has had a significant impact on popular culture, inspiring countless movies, TV shows, and books. It has also often been used as a tool for social commentary, exploring themes such as politics, faith, and morality. Science fiction has been instrumental in shaping our understanding of the world around us, such as how big the universe is, and inspiring new technologies such as satellites and instant communication, and exploring ideas such as transhumanism and time travel. It has also been used as a means of escapism, allowing the readers to explore new worlds and possibilities beyond our own. Overall, science fiction is a genre that has had a profound impact on our culture and society, inspiring new ideas and ways of thinking.
So welcome Adnan, how are you?
Thank you very much, good to be here.
I was just watching your study and I was amazed to see such a huge art collection you have, from LPs to cassettes to CDs, from antiques and what not you have, sculptures, paintings. How have you collected all this? It looks a lifetime work.
Thank you. I'm a collector of things, and I think my life, the way it has panned out, has lent itself to me collecting things. I travel a great deal, I read a great deal.
I learned you have traveled more than 90 countries, I guess.
Yes, that's right.
And
that's
still
half
counting.
the world. Still counting, yes. There's still, a lifetime is too short to see everything. But my travels have taken me to different places and helped me meet different people and indulge in guilty pleasures such as finding antiques and art and things that I love. And so collecting this has been just a natural outcome of that.
I was just seeing stamps collection you have and coins collections you have. We used to do that in our childhood, but we don't more do that. But you are still continuing that passion of yours.
Yes, basically collectors of stamps are called philatelists, so that makes me a philatelist. And stamps are just another way of learning about the world. Every country issues stamps, and based on what time they're doing it, it reflects the preoccupations of those states at those points in time. And so stamps are not just merely strips of paper, but also history and art and culture, and of course science. And I do collect, I have specific collection themes like space and science and polar regions and United Nations and so on.
Oh, great. Okay, coming back to our today's topic, I was just wondering, science and fiction are two different things. Science is based on hard facts, it's evidence-based, whereas fiction is mostly a work of imagination. And how do you mix two different things, rather two opposing things? It's kind of paradox even in its name.
It's interesting. Science, of course, is humans' way of pursuing facts and finding evidence for them. while fiction, of course, finds itself in the opposite camp. But it doesn't mean that if it's not fact, it's a lie. It's essentially a reimagination or an imagination of alternative facts. And science fiction would therefore mean imagining other possibilities to those that exist. And I think it was Einstein who actually said imagination is more powerful than education. And what he really meant was that education means collection of facts as they stand now, and which would mean that there's still more worlds to explore. And if we haven't found them yet, then one way to do that would be to employ your imagination to explore other possibilities. And therefore, the art of that becomes science fiction. But essentially, what is science fiction? It is really literature, like other forms of literature. Let's say historical fiction, which really is, using history as a backdrop to telling certain stories. And there could be, other sub-genres of historical fiction. For example, partition stories are in themselves a unique form of literature, if we look at our own region. And so science fiction similarly employs science as a means to just using it as a backdrop to exploring other things. So one of the famous writers of science fiction was Arthur C. Clarke. And I'm very fortunate to have actually met him as a young fan of his when I was doing my A-levels in Sri Lanka. He was based there. And so he came up with 3 laws, really. And the first one was, he said, if scientists tell you something is possible, then they're almost certainly right. But if they tell you something is not possible, they're almost certainly wrong. And the second was, the only way to find what's possible is to go beyond it into the possible. And thirdly, he said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So how do you look at the world beyond what is around you is using imagination. And science fiction as a form of literature uses that really well.
Then how this science fiction evolved? I think it's not a very old style of writing. How did it evolve over time?
That's right. Since literature really focuses on people and and how they face up to the undiscovered yet, and in many cases, it is an existential crisis for people who can't get enough resources to sustain themselves. And so science fiction, the way it has evolved, it's not an old form. Really, it is 120 years old in the shape that it is consciously acknowledged right now. But the science fiction really started when the first human looked up into the sky and saw the stars and wondered what they were and what lay beyond the sky. And as society progressed and technology shaped it, and advancing science shaped people's priorities and possibilities, it became gradually a part of the narrative that societies use to tell stories. But of course, science and technology have been catalyzed over the last several decades in particular. And so over these decades, it became a visible form of particular kind of storytelling, because it was repeatedly trying to imagine what lies in the future, and whether as science was evolving, the latest understanding of the natural world was helping us imagine better or not. And that is what the art form of science fiction is. Authors that don't necessarily have a background in science, but are able to use their imagination about the future. We can always imagine and live in the past in our minds, and we tend to do that a lot. We reminisce and have nostalgia. But science fiction is also called a history of the future. And so to imagine
Back to the future, something like that?
Yeah. So maybe, in the far future, when the society is really enveloped in technology-based, then we will pine for a future of the past, which was better in terms of understanding human emotions rather than focusing on just the science and technology.
Okay. When you say that the first man who looked into the skies and wonders what are the stars and where they came from, it reminds me, I think, is one of Bernard Shaw's saying that you see the things which always were and ask why. I see the things which never were and ask why not. So do you think science fiction explores this aspect of human reality as well?
It does. I think humans as a species are very restless because
Anxiety is there.
anxieties,
Yeah.
because they don't feel in control, and this obsession with being in control means looking at what's possible and why isn't possible yet, and then agonizing over how they can manage that. And so science fiction kind of enables it, because where science fiction goes today, science and society go tomorrow. And therefore it's a very natural outcome of how we as a civilization are able to imagine futures and alternatives that might not exist yet, but we can strive for.
Okay, great. I mean, what I understand is that science fiction brings into possibilities brought about by science which can change human societies or shape new societies which we have not yet imagined, kind of.
That's true. The thing is, we as a species are always, the pursuit of truth means you will discover new things,
Yeah.
and you will update your beliefs and your understanding about the natural world and our inner space, our inner minds. And science fiction, particularly focuses on that. But what was science fiction yesterday is science today or fact today, and what is science fiction today will be fact tomorrow. And this ability of science fiction to use the art form of literature to provide answers to even questions we haven't asked yet. Science fiction is also the possibility of asking the right questions, because it may come up with the answers first, because they can imagine quite well what we are after. And so, yes.
Okay, Nan, what are the major works of science fiction so far, and why are they important?
I think over the 20th century in particular really catalyzed society and transformed it into something that would otherwise have taken us much more time. I mean, according to science, humans have been around for 300,000 years, and cities have been around for only 7,000 years.
Yeah.
And so how we live as society and our experience of being aware and conscious of the larger universe has shaped societies as they are today. And because we've used science to do that, it has become a part of our everyday lives. And so how the pace at which societies have evolved has also enabled works of science fiction to focus on them and to project them into the future and see what will happen. For example, use of internet is something, access to the entire repository of human information was only the domain of states until 40 years ago. Until 30 years ago, people weren't using internet to educate themselves. Now everyone can do that. Take the example of social media. Facebook and Twitter, these real-time social media did not even exist 25 years ago. And so it means that science is able to help us imagine futures that can be translated into work. So there have been various interesting works, such as, let's say, the novel 2001: A Space Odyssey, again by Arthur C. Clarke, in which the protagonist is a rogue computer who's dealing with humans in space that have gone on a mission to Jupiter to explore radio signals from apparently an alien source. But it's interesting how the computer aboard the spaceship sees things alternatively, and that and forms opinions that are diametrically opposed to the instructions to it, and takes decisions based on its intelligence and its sentience that end up jeopardizing the mission for humans, but able to connect to other alien civilizations. And there have been other works. If you come to this century, then in recent times there are works by, let's say, British authors Ian Banks, who writes a series of science fiction novels based on what he calls the culture universe, so which is a state where it's a multi-species universe where there is pluralism, where it is a post-scarcity world, where people, our innate desire to be immortal has been realized. And where you don't need to do any work, everything is automated. But what do you do when you have immortality but don't have to do anything? And the answers that he provides across a set of over 10 novels are a fascinating insight into what one of them will happen in the future. The way society is progressing and technological progress is enabling us to go farther. So works like these have informed how societies and states and people as individuals understand the boundaries that exist and how to push them, and also not to take them so far as to fundamentally alter life as we know it.
So what I understand is that science fiction uses science as a device to create a situation with some scientific innovations in which normal human society's living style is disturbed, and in that unknown situation human beings try to explore new ways, or they rediscover their instincts, their fears, their desires, their frustrations, these kind of things. Science fiction, I think, explores.
That's right. Essentially, I think the phrase science fiction throws off many people because they might think, there's a lot of science there.
Yeah.
But I can assure you, you don't need to really understand science to enjoy science fiction.
Okay.
The thing is, science and technology, this convergence of technologies, everything is becoming, is progressing geometrically and taking us forward. And it is having a deep impact on society. I mean, remember when we were children, we used to read books about Uran Tashtri and so on.
Yeah.
But then if we go back just 100 years, when there
More
were
than 100 years. Yeah.
just
Around 100 years.
around 100 years, there were no aeroplanes.
Yeah.
And to our ancestors, really
Yeah.
not ancestors but grandparents,
Yeah.
planes of today would seem like Uran Tashtris.
Yeah.
And I think science fiction, again, where it goes, societies follow. And that means, how concepts are translated into reality, and how imagination turns into reality. And in fact, it can be quite unsettling. Imagine our ability today to instantly communicate with anyone, anywhere.
Yeah.
We come from a generation where that did not happen. That wasn't the reality.
Yeah.
But the current generation, they are not aware of a time when this did not happen.
Yeah.
And so you and I, we live in a reality that has multiple versions, because our children can't. I mean, of course, they can imagine a time when that didn't happen, but it's not an everyday reality for them.
Yeah.
But it's still to us because we have memories, we remember that time. Social media used to be, playing in the streets and exchanging notes.
Yeah, very interesting. We belong to the generation, I think, which has seen so many changes in its own lifetime, and sometimes we feel strangers to the time passing around us because we had never imagined it that before.
Yes.
Very interesting, Adnan. No, just if you could tell us how this science fiction has influenced our popular culture.
Yes. The biggest contributor of science has been to create a critical mass of understanding and awareness among people that we can do much more than we are doing. We don't need to take hundreds of years or thousands of years to develop into a society that that allows everyone to realize their individual potential. So with use of society, let's say the internet, for example, let's say immersive technologies, let's say space travel, which has allowed us to develop new new technologies in turn that are changing life as we know it. For example, how do you address climate crisis issues by moving away from fossil fuel? If that imperative was not there, then we wouldn't be inclined to use natural sources of energy like solar or wind energy. We now have technologies that weren't in place 40 years ago. And it's the ability of science to do that. And one of the heroes of this phenomenon is Carl Sagan, an American astronomer and scientist who is arguably the world's most popularizer of science. So he wrote a book in the 1970s called Cosmos, pulling together, because he was part of NASA in exploring the solar system, actually designing the spacecrafts that managed to go to all these planets. So he was able to, pull together information, latest information about them, and use it in common language to help people understand how Earth is unique and how what is the potential that the other planets present themselves in terms of how society can move out. How can we move from being a global civilization using technology to send our technological ambassadors and robots to other planets, and then use the information we've gleaned there into then becoming spacefaring civilization. Since late 1990s, there has not been one single day when humans have not been in space. And so humans went into space and on the moon and beyond even before we were able to think what we could do. Science fiction got there when humans arrived at the moon. Science fiction had been there for over 100 years. So in a way it shaped the dreams of what was possible. And in popular culture there were series like in our childhood, Star Trek series, to boldly go where no man has gone before. It taps into
$6 million man and Bionic
$6 million man and Bionic Woman. It was about extending our capabilities, and it was about, and Star Trek so accurately predicted the emergence of things like the internet, things like mobile phones and tablets, when computers didn't exist. And so it is a virtuous cycle where science informs society and society informs science, and technology helps us move forward. And science fiction has always been able to, it gets more credit than the level of influence it has had on our thinking as a species. Because in our everyday lives, we're not thinking in terms of a civilization, we're thinking in terms of individuals and societies. But science fiction helps us do that.
Then does science fiction also tell us stories about human interaction with aliens?
Well, I think the biggest question of all would be, is there life anywhere else? You see, we humans are the dominant species on this planet. And so we do not have an equal. So innately, we're worried about a superior civilization. And we want to know, in either case, whether aliens exist or not, which is really saying, do other civilizations exist or not? Because whether they do or not, both outcomes are terrifying for us. If they do not, it would mean we are so unique that the preoccupations we have on a daily basis are pedestrian. We should be thinking of, expanding our footprint across the galaxy and the universe. But if there are others, then the question would arise of who.
What if they come to attack us?
Yes, I mean, they can be benign or they can be malevolent. And you know, they may be malevolent only because we are not able to communicate with them.
Yeah.
And so it's important to know how do we communicate with them. I mean, it's not impossible. We have in our homes pets like dogs and cats with whom we communicate. They're able to tell us when they're hungry. They're able to relate to whether we're feeling well or not. And so we do communicate with them. There are different species. But I think what we're really talking about is technological civilization. Species is one thing, civilization is another. There are millions of species on this planet, but we are the dominant. But a civilization is not supposed to annihilate others. It's supposed to engage and to collaborate in sharing resources that are available in the universe. But you will need an engagement and a dialogue, and science fiction provides us means to do that.
How does science fiction also help us in understanding science and technology around?
Indeed. I think the way thinking influences how fast we want to go into the future. Let's say this whole Cold War paranoia, where we were on the brink of a nuclear war. So we created technologies to annihilate each other and therefore the world. But it's interesting that same technology that runs missiles, intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles, is the one that is used to escape the gravity well of our planet and move into space. It was the same technology that helped us create the International Space Station. And now even China has created its own station. And so it's really about what use or good technology can be for us if we do not employ it for dangerous purposes like, you know, settling old scores. And in that sense, you know, science fiction has influenced the evolution of science and technology. It has helped us clarify that there are alternative uses of science and technology that are beneficial to entire mankind.
And that brings another question. If science fiction has also touched social and political themes and situations in their stories?
Indeed, I would argue that some of the most creative ways of analyzing and addressing social and political issues have been done by science fiction. Race and gender and also exploitation of the natural world that has turned into climate crisis, for example, are just two. So there was a writer in the US called Alice Sheldon, who was a black woman and in the 60s, and who could, the popular imagination did not allow for acknowledging that not only blacks could equally be adept at understanding and using science and technology, but then black women could also write science fiction, could imagine all these worlds. And so she wrote under a pen name of James Tiptree Jr. And she wrote a novel called Houston, Do You Read? And it's about a group of scientists traveling into the future on our planet Earth and finding that all the men have disappeared and the world is just doing fine with the women running it. And it was like we talk about this now, but back then in the 60s, even in the West, it was not commonplace for this to happen. And then there was another writer, a white woman writer, so it was easier for her to publish under her own name. But nonetheless, she touched upon issues of gender. So she wrote a book called The Left Hand of Darkness. Her name was Ursula Le Guin. And it talked about a planet where it was mandatory under the law to change genders for 1 month in a calendar year as a means of not only understanding but improving understanding gender equation, but also improving society because you were able to relate to those experiences better. And this, of course, again happened in the 1970s, and these were early days in terms of discussion was kicking up about these social issues, but they were able to imagine, worlds where these issues had been resolved and were resulting in better societies.
So there's another related question that if science fiction has also helped us understand human condition.
Oh yes. So science fiction is...
It's not much different what we were discussing before, but maybe in a more elaborate way.
Yes, I think it is really a question that lies at the heart of not what science fiction is, but how it helps us understand the human condition better. Of course, the aim of literature is exactly that. And science fiction is usually considered a cousin of philosophy because it makes a conscious effort to understand the big questions in life and to try and answer them. And so questions, for example, if humans want better health, they want longer lives, and they want more facilities. But even setting aside the current scientific or technological constraints, let's imagine for a second that we can live for 500 years or 1,000 years. So how would you, what would that entail? Does the human mind has the capability yet to have across those centuries of their life, can they live radically different lives from each other, multiple in one single lifetime, for example? And can they, what happens when something like what's called transhumanism happens? So science fiction accurately predicted that we would end up cloning each other, for example, and we have the capability. Back in the 1980s, we cloned animals. We can theoretically clone humans now also, but there are ethical questions involved. And so what if we are able to fundamentally edit our genes and fundamentally alter who we are? What if there are digital versions of ourselves and we transcend our physical limitations? It would that mean we are still human? Or would that mean we are in a different place or shape but can retain our humanity? So science fiction is able to do its bit and add its contribution to this philosophical debate about how to tackle the human condition, both in terms of our existence and what if there are other versions of ourselves, what would we do then?
So do you think these people like Elon Musk have written a lot of science fiction and then they're trying to materialize what they might have perceived as some possibility because of science?
Well, I've certainly read the biography of Elon Musk. So he's not a writer, but
No, he is not a writer, but he's a doer, I think.
He's an amazing doer, and so he is actually, if he will be the person who will put humans on Mars. He is currently building the systems that will take us there and set up a base on Mars. He's actually helping NASA get back on the moon. But I read in his biography, he was an avid reader of science fiction. And there are other people like, the inventor of Apple, Tim Cook, and then Bill Gates of Microsoft and others. They regularly, they throughout their life have been reading science fiction and have been influenced by the possibilities that technology offers in terms of fast tracking human evolution and our civilizational evolution. And they're playing their part in it.
Interesting. So do you think there are some challenges as well in writing science fiction?
Yes. So I think the key challenge is, let's see the context in which scientists write science fiction. So science fiction writers, of course, are science literate, but society in general is not.
Okay.
So
but society is based on science, but maybe not science literate enough.
That's right. I mean, for example, we use our mobile phones every day or our computers. We don't need to understand how they operate to be able to use them. And so that means, not all humans have to understand science. It is, I think, preferable if they do, and I think states should do more, and societies should do more to help children pursue careers in science, because it will only take us forward and help us overcome our problems, from social problems, political problems, environmental problems, how to resolve the climate crisis, for example. And so I think in that sense, science fiction is able to help us.
So Adnan, please tell us some good science fiction written in our country or in South Asia.
Yes, South Asia has taken some time to catch up, but I think both in Pakistan and in other parts of South Asia, there have been, particularly in recent years, a spate of writers also interested in trying their hand at science fiction. For example, let's say Pakistan. So there's a youngish new writer, Arshad Waheed. He's a medical practitioner, and he's written a novel called 74. It's a very good novel and has even been praised by writers like Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote science fiction novels like Aurora, celebrated writer. And so Arshad Waheed has written a novel called 74 about a post-pandemic world in which technocracy has replaced democracy, and where a cap has been placed on humans who can live only up to 73 years. And so there will be euthanasia and assisted suicide after that age. So its protagonist, a Pakistani doctor, Dr. Razia, is one of the characters in the story that helps us deal with this new reality, that in a post-pandemic world where it's really difficult to take care of the elderly population. So what do we do? So grief, loss, second chances. So it's a very nicely written novel.
Quite dark, I think.
It's dark, but I think we were at a point during the COVID pandemic. So it's not about the COVID pandemic, the novel, but of course COVID happened and people were thinking what will happen now. And we all had dark visions of where we might end up. But then we are seeing, these bugs are mutating, and this is not the last time we will face a pandemic, so there will be others. And so there's another writer, an Urdu writer, Shamsur Rahman Farooqi Sahab, of the Kai Chand The Sare Asman fame. He wrote a short novel called Kabze Zaman. And
I have heard of that novel, but I haven't read that.
It is also an interesting one because it kind of borrows from the Rip Van Winkle story of a guy who, in a village, who goes to sleep, but when he wakes up, finds himself decades ahead into the future, and becomes bewildered and can't make sense of things. And really, it's really an allegory about how change can envelope and consume us. And so we have that fear whether change will be good for us or not. And he also infuses it with Sufic traditions of looking at large tracts of time and so on.
Okay.
But in recent years, China has emerged as a major powerhouse of science fiction. A particular writer called Cixin Liu, whose Three Body Problem trilogy book has gone viral. Again, it traverses the entire expanse of time and goes to the end of the universe, imagining what would happen.
Well, you've just referred to pandemic, and that reminds me of another novel, which is not exactly science fiction, but literary fiction, and it's Nobel laureate Jose Saramago's Blindness.
Yes.
And that the whole country, how everyone is getting blind, and what happens when everyone is blind, and how our base human instincts come up, and how we behave wildly in a society which was otherwise very civilized. But that's some subject of some other discussion. So Adnan, would you tell us what's the future of science fiction as a genre, as an art form?
I think science fiction's future is guaranteed. That much is sure, because we only if the human civilization annihilates itself will, you know, everything end, which I think is not what will happen, although we do have that potential. But I think the challenge for science fiction is to imagine and articulate complex futures, but for a large population that is not science literate. And so making their stories and their narratives believable is the biggest challenge they will face. And it would probably become much more difficult because science is now such an important part of our lives that, that it would be difficult if new writers don't really go to other forms of literature and are also able to do plain talking while really telling complex stories.
Do you think it would exist in the forms of books and stories, or film would take over in portraying science fiction?
I think both will exist. People will write. It doesn't matter if we read it in the form of a book or not. We can read it on electronic devices. I do a great deal of reading on my Kindle, and so do many others. But books will always be published in whatever forms they are, and stories will always be told because that's what we humans do. We use stories as a means of keeping sane, and science fiction would be no different from any other form of literature.
You have any intention to write yourself some piece of science fiction?
I have written a couple of short stories, and I do have a main idea for a book, but I think I'll have to wait a couple of years.
I think
before I
you
sit
have read
down
enough, and you don't need to read more. Now it's time for you to write something as well for Pakistani readers at least.
Yes, but the problem is there are all these writers writing really good stories, and I keep getting distracted.
But you can add value.
I can, you know, hopefully I will at some point.
Who is your favorite science fiction writer, by the way? Just one.
So I'll speak about two,
Okay.
just mention them. So Arthur C. Clarke from the previous century, and I've read over 20 of his books, and he's written about 30. The others are science books rather than science fiction. And from this century, I rather like Adrian Tchaikovsky, a British writer, who is writing phenomenally long, sprawling sagas, space operas, and it's a feast for the imagination. You get lost in those stories, and it's difficult to come back to reality after reading them.
Okay. Now here science is taking you away from reality. So thank you very much, Adnan. I really enjoyed talking to you. It was a wonderful discussion, and I'm sure our viewers would have enjoyed it too. So thank you, viewer, for watching us, and see you next Sunday, same time. Take care.